Welcome to the second in our series of online presentations developed to help third sector organisations prepare a strong case for support and make better funding applications. The 5 topics covered in this series are project planning, getting things right for an application, evidencing need, the nuts and bolts of a funding application, and monitoring and evaluation. I'm Jackie Niven from Kincardineshire Development Partnership, and today we're going to look at getting things right for an application. To do this, we will cover constitutions, charitable status, policies, bank accounts, insurance, and volunteers. Why does your organisation need a constitution? It can help to show that you have clear and transparent governance. It also will help identify purposes and aims of your organisation. It will help with funding. Most funders will ask for a constitution, and you won't be able to open a bank account without one. Before you start to write your constitution, you will need to decide the best way for your organisation to be formed. So what legal structure you would undertake. There are quite a few to consider, but by far the most straightforward would be the unincorporated association. They're easy to set up. There's no registration or reporting requirements unless you're a charity, and it's a less intimidating structure. On the downside, though, there's no legal personality, so contracts and titles have to be taken out in names of management committee members. And there's no limited liability, so management committee can be liable for debt, etc., and can be seen as less robust in eyes of some funders. Becoming ever more popular is the Scottish Charitable Incorporated Organisation, or SCIO, and this benefits from having its own legal personality, so contracts and titles can be held in the name of the organisation, and it also offers limited liability. Although I hasten to add that limited liability is only, you're only protected if you have been able to prove due diligence, and it won't protect individuals if there's been negligence. You only have one regulator through OSCAR, and it's relatively easy to set up, and it is often seen as more robust than unincorporated organisations by some funders. But on the downside, you have to be a charity and pass the charity test. And if you are removed from the charity register, that results in the dissolution of your organisation. And members are subject to some of the duties of charity trustees, and administering membership can be a burden. You may wish to consider becoming a company limited by guarantee. A lot of social enterprises use this model. The pros are that you could be a charity if you meet the purposes. And again, it has that limited liability, although that caveat that you need to show due diligence. It has its own legal personality, so contracts and titles will be held in the name of the organisation. And again, it's seen as more robust than an unincorporated organisation by some funders. But on the downside, there are some costs to set up, and annual reporting costs, which you need to register with Companies House. And if you're a charity, you'll also need to register with OSCAR. You'll have to prepare accrued accounts only, and there is a bit of work in setting it up. These are not the only structures available. Other possibilities could be a community interest company, especially if you have a large asset, because it has an asset lock function. It could be a trust, a cooperative, or a community benefit society. As mentioned earlier, many groups and organisations consider becoming a SCIO. So what does it mean to have charitable status? A charity is a legal status rather than a legal form. It's a voluntary organisation in which assets can only be used to further the charitable purposes of the organisation. And you'll need to be registered with OSCAR, and the role of OSCAR is to determine whether organisations can have charitable status, keep a register of charities, and monitor and encourage compliance with the Charities Act 2005. An organisation can only become a charity if it passes the charity test. So it can only have charitable purposes. So, for example, things like the prevention of or relief of poverty, the advancement of education, the advancement of citizenship or community development, or the promotion of equality and diversity. There's 15 charitable purposes in all, with one broader statement. It also has to provide a public benefit. So why do we need policies? Policies can be a useful way of expressing the values and ideas of the people in your group. They do not have to be formal or difficult to understand. They provide a common understanding and agreement on how things should be done. And policies should be living documents that must be regularly reviewed to ensure that they meet the needs of all the people involved in your group and take into account the possible changes that have happened in the group and within the wider community. In summary, policies are good practice. They help establish professional and effective organisations. They provide consistency. They can also prevent any ambiguity about how particular situations or issues should be handled. They promote harmony amongst group members, and they help groups to be more efficient and effective. There are many policies your organisation could have, but there are some that you should have. So your basic requirements would be to have a health and safety policy, an equal opportunities or diversity policy, if relevant, child and vulnerable adult protection, volunteers, complaints, data protection and confidentiality policy. Other documentation to consider, especially in relation to any funding applications, would be insurance, bank accounts, planning permission, quotes, and receipts and invoices. When thinking about what policies your organisation might need, consider the following questions. So, what's the nature and scope of the activities you're undertaking? And what are the characteristics of the client group you're working with? Where is the volunteering opportunity taking place? Are volunteers working alone or with other people? What are the timescales? What does the law say? And how much responsibility do volunteers have? And what is the size of the organisation or group? We mentioned volunteers, and volunteers are the lifeblood of many third sector organisations. To help retain volunteers and recognise the important contribution they make, there are ways they can be supported and rewarded. For organisations, there are quality systems like investing in volunteers or the Volunteer Friendly Award. And for volunteers, there are things like the Saltire Award, Duke of Edinburgh Award, Discovery Award, and AVA Awards. So to summarise this short presentation, We looked at constitutions and why your group should have one. We considered structures and charitable status, the pros and cons of those. Looked at policies and what good practice would be. And other requirements such as bank accounts, insurance, etc. And we looked at how we can support and recognise our volunteers. We hope this presentation has given you an overview of what you may need to consider when looking at getting the basics right before you make a funding application. Of course, every organisation is different and more detailed one-to-one support may be required. If your group or organisation would like to consider your governance and policies, help is available through your local rural partnership, third sector interface or your local Aberdeenshire Council Business Development Executive. Many thanks for listening.